and through a cost action called Eurocitizen that looks at enhancing understanding of evolution across Europe and the world. And so cost actions are an EU initiative to foster pan-European collaboration and facilitate members from across the EU to meet and work together, boosting innovation, research and careers. Unfortunately, Eurocitizen is now at an end, at the end of its funding. However, I would encourage you all to check out the website and look the website for Eurocitizen, because it's got tons of information on increasing literacy and evolution through the different working groups, and also to look at its sister project, Evoke, which stands for Evolutionary Knowledge for Everyone, which is going to be hosting a conference in July this year in Bath, and has just some of the most amazing workshops and talks on making evolutionary knowledge accessible. And it's one of the most fun and warm conferences I've ever been to. So I really encourage you to go and check out those two websites and that information. So I can tell I'm probably going to be too fast for my introduction already. I don't have any slides showing at the moment, which is why you can't see slides. Johan, Israt, sorry. So the big question is why are we all here? Why is this important? Well, unfortunately, as we are all painfully aware as evolutionary biologists, and despite the wealth of evidence that we have for evolution, it's still poorly understood by both the general public and even other scientists. And yet evolutionary processes shape almost every facet of our lives. And for the last few years, we've all just lived basically an evolutionary biology lesson in real time in the form of COVID. And I know for one that I was really grateful for my evolutionary training through that period. It helped me navigate what information to pay more heed to than others, and helped me avoid many of the emotional ups and downs that other colleagues and friends experienced. And it's not just in health and things like that evolutionary knowledge is incredibly important. It factors into climate change and climate change adaptation. It factors into food security, biodiversity loss and how we address that, as well as obviously health. And levels of acceptance of evolution are related to all sorts of identity and social factors. And so there's not just one size fits all method to teaching evolution or to engaging people in evolution. And furthermore, many of the challenges of evolution are within the sort of simplicity with which evolution, especially the theory of natural selection, seems to be. It seems like the sort of term survival of the fittest seems really easy to understand. It seems so simple, and yet it hides this wealth of complexity that means that it's really easy to have for misconceptions and confusions to develop. And we're also probably a lot of us here because we teach evolution and we have to use public engagement in our day-to-day working lives. And they're a very important part of our roles. And when done effectively, they can also be fun, rewarding, and benefit society and our students and the people we engage with, but also us through increased funding opportunities or publication opportunities. And it is becoming more and more an important part of the funding landscape. So NSF have the broadening impact, and we're seeing terms like citizen science and engaging the public come more and more into funding in Europe as well, in the EU, particularly through Horizon Europe grants. As I pointed out, there's no one right way to teach or engage people about evolution. And so what we've done today is we've brought together education researchers, evolutionary biologists, and participatory science practitioners from Asia all the way across Europe to America, to present and discuss different methods and tools that they've created or that they use to teach and engage people in evolution. This symposium stretches across 2 sessions, so please do come back after the break and join us at the end when we have a panel discussion for you to pick our speakers' brains and to answer any more of your questions. So the way the symposium is going to run is we're going to have 2 speakers, then a 10-minute Q&A, 2 more speakers, a break, then another 10-minute Q&A with the speakers from the previous session, 2 more speakers, and then a 10-minute break again. I have gone far too fast, apologies. But is it okay if we start a little earlier with the first speaker and I pass over to Dula to introduce them? Or no, Patricia's not here yet. So I can talk a bit more about...
Patricia's having a little bit of issues logging on. We're trying to fix it in just a minute.
No worries. So I can talk a little bit more about some of the issues that are facing. So some of that you'll know from, particularly in the US. So some of the sort of the data behind this is that acceptance of evolution in general, in the general population, has only recently in the US risen to above 50%. And indeed, even amongst experienced AP biology teachers, we only see moderate levels of acceptance of evolution, and low understanding of both evolution content and the nature of science have been recorded. So it's not just about, so the reason we've got such a large diversity of the types of practitioners presenting is because it's not just important to engage our students in our classes, but also to engage society more broadly and to address misconceptions and barriers to evolution and understanding of evolution more broadly across all of society. Levels of acceptance of evolution, as I mentioned, are related to things like identity factors such as religiosity or conservative views. And additionally, acceptance of evolution is influenced by the total number of years spent in education, understanding of the nature of science, attitudes towards science, gross domestic product per capita, and knowledge or understanding of evolution. And furthermore, increasing levels of knowledge about evolution tend to lead to an increase in acceptance of evolution, regardless of the levels of religiosity or political identity. So there's no one to be discounted when we're wanting to talk about evolution. We've just got to be very aware of who we're talking to and address those issues. And that's some of what our speakers today will be addressing, is how you are going to engage different types of communities, people with experiencing these different barriers, and different then methods and innovative tools for engaging those different communities. And a key challenge for scientists in trying to increase knowledge about evolution is that this is what I said about it being very simple, seeming simple, and compounding these are challenges around communication, with some evolutionary terminology having different meanings when used scientifically as when used colloquially. And I'll talk much more about that when I present later in the symposium in the next session. And so that's what we are trying to address. And do we have any more word on Patricia? Yep, is she? Maybe we could swap Jolyn and Patricia. Would that be a good? Oh no, Rana, sorry, and Patricia. Would that be possible, Rana? Would you be?
Yeah, that's fine with me.
That's fine. Okay, so Dilla, do you mind if I pass you over to do a quick? I'll pass over to you now to do a quick introduction on our 2 speakers, and hopefully Patricia's connection problems will be solved after Rana's.
Claire, I also want to point out Peter has his hand up. Peter, you are a co-host, so you do have the ability to unmute yourself.
Fantastic. I just want to very quickly, for a full disclosure, just say that Dr. Narroway was my PhD student, and I am extremely proud of her for putting together this symposium and the work she's been doing since she's left my lab, even though I never managed to teach her the American way of saying evolution. but I am still very proud of her. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I was definitely going to say how grateful I was for being in your lab and I will still do that when I introduce you as well later in the symposium. And yeah, it'll always be evolution to me. You'll never succeed.
All right, so I'll take over from Claire. Thanks for that introduction. My name is Dule Mišević. I'm a director of research affairs at the Learning Planet Institute in Paris, and I'm the co-host of the session. So we'll, for those of you who just joined, for some technical reasons, we will swap the first two speakers in this session, and we'll start with Professor Rana Dajani. She's at the Department of Biology and Biotechnology at the Hashemite University in Jordan. And her talk is entitled How to Win the Evolution Argument by Not Winning. Rana, it's great to see you again, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation. I'm really excited to be with you here today and to share my insights from my teaching experience over the years. Can you see my screen? Great. All right. So I like to start by introducing myself really briefly, that I play 5 roles in my life. And inherent in that is something I want to share, is that I'm a mother. I'm also a teacher, not just, I used to be a school teacher from K to 12, and then now at the university. And I'm a scientist. I work on trauma and epigenetics, which is rooted in evolutionary history and how we survived, and ethnic populations and how we can learn from various different human lineages to discover novel gene risk factors for disease. I also work in creating STEM law in Jordan and the Islamic world to help influence conducting research and therapy, which is also involved in evolution, because these are all examples of how evolution plays intimate roles in our everyday lives, even if we think that it doesn't. And I also founded a program, I'm a social entrepreneur, called We Love Reading, to encourage children to read for fun, because when you read for fun, you become a critical thinker, which is also very important for evolution. And I wrote a book about it, and there's a whole chapter about evolution in that book. I urge you, you can get the book, and I can share it with a PDF with anyone who wants it. It was reviewed in Nature, and there's an Arabic version, because we're talking to an audience who teaches evolution across the globe to various cultures and multilingual people. Now, when I teach biology for my introductory students at the university, or when I used to at school and high school, everybody was fine. Nobody, when you talk, because evolution is part of biology, when you explain any mechanism or the behavior of any molecule in a signaling pathway, it's all based on evolutionary theory. However, and you may not say it as such, but it comes up. However, when you actually say the word evolution, immediately alarm bells go up, right? And everybody's kind of, oh my God, what's happening? What is this? So there's this knee-jerk reaction, which is very surprising, because if I'm just talking about the biology, everybody's fine. It's only the word evolution or Darwin that sets those ringing bells. So how do I approach that? So hopefully this talk will be a number of approaches that I utilize when I teach an Islamic population, regardless whether in the West or non-West, whether Arabic-speaking country or non-Arabic-speaking country. And bear in mind, there are 1.7 billion Muslims around the world, and many of them live in Western communities as well. So what do I do? First of all, I set the ground base that there are multiple perspectives on the world, and we go through an exercise which we don't have time to do here, but you can find it in my in my book, where I show them 2 pictures of the old woman, young woman, and I condition my students. Half of them see the young woman, half of them see the old woman, and then I show them the composites. And then it takes, some can see both in the picture immediately, but others who have been conditioned to see the young person will only see the young. And those who are conditioned to see the old woman will only see the old, and it'll take them like 10 minutes to see the other side. And I say, I conditioned you for 1 minute by showing you these 2 different pictures separately, and it takes you 10 minutes to see the other side. So imagine a lifetime of conditioning, seeing the world from one particular perspective, and thinking that you are right and everybody else is wrong, and then realizing that no, there's another perspective. And I tell them, this is how we're going to start this discussion, or any discussion for that matter. So this not only helps them for evolution, but for anything in life, that you should always give the benefit of the doubt. It doesn't mean you agree with the other side, but it means you can understand why they think differently. And that's important, because I don't want to make them accept evolution so much as I don't want them to make me not accept evolution. It's about relying on logic and logical thinking, coming to a conclusion on their own. Because when I start my course of teaching evolution, I ask my students to write an essay of what is their opinion about evolution. And usually their opinion is based on hearsay from other contexts and people. And by the end of the course, I ask them again, and I'll tell you about that later. But it's all about focusing on them to come up with their own opinion that they have thought through rather than repeating what others think. And to me, that's fundamental. So I start by talking about what is the role of humans on Earth as a Muslim. And from our perspective, it's all about living in harmony with all the rest of creation, and that we are guardians in the sense that we don't have power, but in the sense we have responsibility because of of whatever extra complexity things we have to take care. So we're guardians, and that's more of a responsibility. And how do we perform that guardianship? Is that we have the Quran, which is the holy book of Muslims, to guide us on how to live our lives, right? So the Quran is not a book of science. That is fundamental. It's just a book of ethics and guidelines and universal values of how to conduct our lives with other fellow humans and take care of that guardianship around us. So what is our role? Our role, we have a brain, which is complex, which gives us higher levels of cognition. And it is compulsory upon us as part of our religion to use that brain logically. And so there are many verses that talk about observing and thinking and searching for knowledge, right? And giving examples of nature around us. And so in a way, explicitly in the Quran, the scientific method is spelled out, right? It's about observation, trying to find an explanation, which is a hypothesis. You test it. If it works, fine. If not, you keep going around and around. And that was the basis of all the previous Islamic civilization scientific discoveries, which modern science is based on, whether medicine or astronomy or even artificial intelligence and internet was based on algorithms designed by Muslim scholars, because they understood that kind of framework of what is the role of a human being. And so from that premise, scientists could come from any religion. You don't have to be Muslim, and science is not just for one religion or so. And it's all about seeking the truth. And there's even a saying that says, if you're a judge and you give a judgment and you're correct, you get 2 rewards. And if you're wrong, you get 1 reward. So that's freedom. That's a license to explore, make mistakes, and keep on going. So I tell my students, therefore, as a Muslim, I'm observing nature around me. And Darwin was another one of those scientists who was basically being a human being, using his brain, observing, and he came up with an explanation for why we have diversity of species. And I go into explaining in a very simple way the theory of evolution, which I'm not going to go to because I'm speaking to the choir about their and what are the observations that Darwin made. And that because of that, he came up with the theory of evolution, which is natural selection, the simplest form I'm saying, that species change over time, they're derived from common ancestors, and Earth and life are old. Now, up till now, my students are fine. And then I tell them that this is actually, as humans, we've been employing that same mechanism when we do artificial intelligence. Farmers, since agriculture was formed, were learned from nature and actually applied it. And that's how natural selection can explain the diversity of life. And that it's happening and I give them examples from animals around them, the cat, the domestic cat, and then how it really evolved from other wild kind of ancestors. So that's fine. And then I make sure that I dispel the misconceptions, right? So the first one is that everybody thinks that evolution means that you deny existence of a God or a higher being. And I say evolution has nothing to do with that beginning. That's a different discussion for someone else. And people are still asking that question. Some people think it's God, nature, whatever, a power. But evolution has nothing to do with that. Evolution just talks about the mechanisms by which living organisms evolve and change. So that's a first misconception that oh, wow, we didn't think that. We thought, if we believe in evolution, you're an atheist. The other thing, other misconceptions that are more nuanced about that it doesn't lead to perfection, that it's not random, that it's not about higher or lower, and that it's not about adapting to the past, and so on. But then I go through the proofs, right? And I'm not going to go through the detailed proofs that we all know of, but ultimately it's the genetic proof that gave us the most powerful evidence that it is not missing as the fossil proof and so on, the fossil history. And I remind them, and it's all around us, that even not just the agricultural farmers, but even today in antibiotic resistance, drug design for influenza vaccine, and how, as natural selection explains how we design those drugs, how we prevent the disease from happening, and even talk about corona, which everybody has been involved in. The level of science awareness has increased, and we talk about not just the protein spike on the virus that evolves and changes and adapts, but also the receptor itself. And how it evolves, and how we even have the haplotypes across the world that changes the susceptibility to infection or severity of response to COVID. And we talk about the Nobel Prize winner and how they discovered that people who had more of the Neanderthal haplotype had a more severe response to COVID. So again, these are just real life examples of how we are living evolution every day in our lives. So at this point, we say, the problem with evolution as a concept, when Darwin first proposed it, was received negatively by the church. I know there are other Christian sects that were not negative in its acceptance, but in general, this was the general idea. I'm not an expert on Christianity. I just say, but this is what's in the textbook, right? And these are the reasons that the church refused Darwin and called him an atheist, because he was denying the Bible itself by virtue of the tenets of evolution. But then I say, but in Islam, all right, so let's take a step back. We're not Christians, we're Muslims. We have a history of scholars who have actually tackled the diversity of organisms in different ways. And as early as 8th century, Al-Jahaz was talking about diversity of organisms, change, adaptation, Ibn Miskawayh, Ikhwan al-Safa. So this was not a new theory. This was not something that just popped out of the blue. There were scholars who had documented and suggested rudimentary theories to evolution, as Darwin had posited it. And then even after Darwin, the origin of species had reached scholars in what is Lebanon today, the Levant, like Al-Jisr, Ahmed Midhat from an Ottomani intellect. And to them, there was no problem with evolution as a concept, as a philosophy, and they were okay with it. It was in Lebanon at the American University of Beirut when missionaries invited a scientist from America who supported evolution. He was kicked out of the Christian university, while the Muslim scholars who were at the same time with them were not against evolution. So you can see how advanced the Islamic response to evolution was acceptance at that time. But then you go to some statistics and publications in the end of the 20th century, and it says, there's a very low acceptance of evolution, and these are some statistics. This was a famous study that was done and published in Science. And that's when I started thinking, wait a minute, there's something wrong here, all right? What happened? How come we all accepted evolution back in the late 19th century, and now we don't? So I'm going to go through reasons of why, and this is what I explain to my students. First, all these published studies, like the one I just mentioned and many others, they used surveys that were done for a Christian audience. The scientists who actually do these studies are not Muslim, so they don't understand the complexity of Islam. There's the language barrier. They just translate terms, and terms mean different in different languages, in different connotations of religion. And when they do those studies on the Muslim populations, the Muslim people don't trust these scientists. What are they doing? Who are these Westerners coming to evaluate what we think? And so this is a very good publication of a critique of all the published reviews of quantitative and qualitative research, why they are wrong, okay? Or they may mislead us. And I urge you to look at them. So really what happened, right? So that's how erroneous the data is in evaluating the Muslim population. Yet there is some rejection. I'm not saying there isn't. So one, these are my explanations. One, that after Al-Jisr and all those scientists in the late 19th century, there was the end of the Ottoman Empire. There was colonization by the British and the French. So it was the lack of qualified natural scientists. Education was restricted to the elite. There was that controversy between the Christians and Darwin that was well known. And then Darwin, social evolution was hijacked by colonialism and used as an excuse. So it became associated with atheism, materialism, racism, imperialism, etc. And so it had that negative connotation. And of course, the religious groups who use this as an agenda for their own political reasons. And again, the problem of language. And when you say, are you a creationist? What does that mean in Islamic context versus Christian context? And then the misinterpretation of religious texts, right? When you take a word out of, and so and then lack of freedom. We came out of colonialism. We still have dictatorships in the Arab and Muslim world. And so if you're going to allow people to have the freedom to think and critique, you're going to have to accept it in every sector of society. So what I tell my students is that theology in us as religion, science is about discovering the laws of nature, using our brains and cognitive powers, and religion is about how to use it, what to do with it, right? So that you're ethical, that you take care of, you're the guardian. And that the word create doesn't necessarily mean it happens spontaneously, because in Islam, time is a long time. We don't have that 6,000 year limit. And therefore, Quran is not a book of science. I'm not going to look for science in the Quran, because even if I find evidence for a theory, what if the theory of science changes, which it may, right? Because we're always changing. Then you'd be, kicking yourself backward because you used it and then you can't use it again. It would backfire in that sense. So interpretation of the text is very relative. And where do we get these interpretations of meaning? It's from the Quran, the Hadith, and how the consensus of scholars. And if you were to go into, if I am going to go into using the Quran verses to support evolution, I can. It's about misinterpreting and different meanings for different verses. But again, I argued that I don't want to go there because that's not the purpose of the Quran. And I'm going to skip these slides because it talks about time, because many Muslims accept, for example, the creation of the universe that took billions of years. So I say, why don't you accept that human organisms took millions of years as well? So what is this challenge? And especially that we don't have a problem with time, right? And then I remind them that Darwin himself was not an atheist, in the sense that he, in the Origin of the Species, he said that there's a creator who originally breathes form into life as it started. So then why are we almost so against it? I think it's partly because of human evolution. That's the stickler. So my students at the end will say, we accept evolution, we're fine. And they write an essay about their own opinion. But it becomes, when it comes to human evolution, it's kind of more difficult. And I say, that's because you're arrogant. How could we be part of everything else? And that's the framework I think that we borrowed from the Western world, of being individualistic and focusing on the individual rather than on community and belonging and to being part of the greater whole. And I think that's why that's very, very important. And so I'm not going to talk about human evolution, but there are references in the Quran that say that humans evolved after giving the evidence from biology, how we are all similar, especially the molecular evidence. But there are many verses that talk about human evolution as well, if we want to interpret them in that way. And even the story of Adam, that's a challenge. However, I say that let's remember what is the purpose of the Quran. It's how to live my life, to learn from that story rather than take it literally as a scientific evidence for evolution. I'm ending.
Okay.
30 seconds, right.
That's fine. That's fine. You have a minute or two.
All right. And when we talk about the human brain as the ultimatum and saying, how could the human brain have evolved? We say, we don't even understand how the human brain works. So how can we start, making claims that how did it evolve and so on? So there's so much we can learn and discover reasons for phenomena that if we don't understand, we can't just relate them to the metaphysical, that there are laws that govern them that are still yet to be discovered. And that's the purpose of being alive, using our mind, going back full circle to the purpose of human beings on earth. And to always remember that we have limitations. Our biology limits us. We're not going to be able to discover everything. However, we keep on striving and coming up with something new. And so this is my conclusion, that first of all, if you appear to have a contradiction between your religion and science, first of all, you check the science, because science is always changing. We're always self-doubt ourselves, and tools are advancing, and remember our limitations. And if that still holds true, that whatever theory is correct, then we start challenging the interpretation of the Quran, because that's done by humans, right? We're not challenging the verse itself. We're challenging who interprets it and how. And in order to interpret it, we need to have a committee of multiple people from different backgrounds, language, history, culture, religion, and science, to understand what this could mean in the context of today. And multiple opinions is healthy, and it's part of the beauty of Islam, accepting multiplicity and the importance of studying philosophy. And I'll end with one verse says, Abraham asked God in the Quran, show me how you can bring the dead back. God doesn't say that's a bad question, you don't believe, it's not allowed. He says, okay, I'll show you the evidence. And he shows him physical evidence. And that's a call to thinking logically, using the scientific method for any doubt in your mind, and to use your brain, never to stop it from asking and questioning. And we're creating a children's story about evolution that will come out soon. And I'm just going to skip these. And these are a number of books. Hopefully this will be online. You could read about evolution that have come out in Islam. and mine in my article in Nature. And I'll remind you of Evoke 2023 to attend. It's going to be a fantastic journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rana. We have a virtual clapping all around. So for those of you who joined, we swapped the speakers. So this was Rana Dajani, who was supposed to go second, but now we will jump back to what was supposed to be our first speaker, who couldn't join right away for technical reasons. Patricia, do you want to go ahead and share your screen?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry for my delay.
Not a problem. Happy to have you with us. So I'm happy to introduce Patricia Pessoa. She's at the Research Center, Didactics and Technology in Education of Trainers at the University of Aveiro in Portugal. And her talk is entitled BEE, Biological Evolution Education for Sustainability.
Yes, thank you. So I think now you are seeing my screen.
Yep, everything is good. Yeah, Mike will raise his little green check or hand about 2 minutes before you're supposed to end, and about 1 minute before I might say something. But you have 15 minutes.
Okay, thank you. So let me start. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on the place in the world that you are now. As you already present me, my name is Patricia Pessoa, and my background is in primary education, but currently I'm doing my PhD. And today I will talk about how we can link biological evolution education with education for sustainability. For that, I would like to start by telling you a short story. Let me see if I can move this. Yeah. Okay, so once upon a time, there was a girl who wanted to change the way teaching was done. And she was interested in making learning more meaningful for students. And to do this, she wanted to address current problems related to the sustainability of our planet. Thus, to promote sustainable development by empowering students to make informed choices, it was necessary to foster the ability to anticipate possible outcomes of the proposed solutions. So later, that girl discovered that in biology, this means to predict biological systems over time. And for this, evolution is crucial. In fact, being evolution a central concept in biology, understanding it is essential to propose effective and informed solutions to several sustainability issues. And to highlight the importance of evolution in sustainability, some studies have already shown examples of how evolution is actually related to different sustainable development goals, the goals of the United Nations, for example. And however, despite the central importance of evolution for understanding biological systems and for solving social and everyday life problems, evolution is still not well understood or even accepted by a large part of the society. And this is a pattern that is observed in different stages of development, countries, cultural or even religious backgrounds, as we heard before. And in addition, there is a connection between understanding evolution and negotiating societal problems. For example, Sadler found that while examining the informal reasoning of biology majors on scenarios based on genetic engineering, their understanding of evolution strongly influenced their decision-making. But the good news is that some studies have shown that kindergarten and primary school students were able to understand and apply the principle of natural selection to explain and predict biological evolution after the pedagogical interventions. So, and even more interesting is that although those students reveal some common misconceptions about evolution, these are easily overcome with instruction. A picture that contrasts strongly with what is known about older students, that their misconception resists to instructions most of the times. So as we saw before, biological evolution is important to predict biological scenarios. So it is also important to develop one of the competencies in sustainability, the anticipatory competency. But then the girl asked herself, how can we make learning more meaningful for students? And that was when she heard about the socio-scientific pedagogical approach, the SSI approach. So SSI are complex, well-structured, and controversial societal topics without a simple and a clear-cut solution that can be informed by science, but also by other ideas and perspectives, like economical ones, political ones, or ethical. And so briefly, this approach should use personal, relevant, controversial, and well-structured problems, should employ the use of scientific topics with social ramifications, so students can debate and discuss and be in an argumentation about these issues. Also, they should integrate ethical components to develop moral reasoning, and they have the focus on the formation of virtue and character. And in fact, when we look for opportunities to address these kind of issues in primary school curricula, it is possible to find several, and with various types of issues that can be explored. As you can see, several opportunities were found to explore issues related to, for example, biodiversity conservation in green, or pollution in dark blue. And I will take this opportunity to say that we will soon publish a paper on the development and improvement of this framework that we used to do the curricular analysis, as well as on the opportunities found in 3 European countries. And additionally, the SSI approach also fosters the development of key competencies in sustainability. We can see that in this review, that we found most interpersonal, also normative, and with a little bit less systems thinking competency is the one that we found more opportunities to develop in the paper that we include in this review. But however, in the same study, we found that there is little diversity in the SSI Explore, with the majority being related to biotechnology. So how can we help educators develop activities with these characteristics that explore socio-scientific issues from an evolutionary perspective, while promoting the development of key competencies in sustainability? And that was when we currently we are here. So currently an interdisciplinary team, of which I am a member, is developing a guide to encourage educators at all grades levels of education to develop educational proposals that simultaneously address learning objectives, align with education for sustainability, and also align with evolution education. And so our work was initially inspired by the study by Carroll et al. 2014. In this study, the authors divide the questions in two groups, rapid evolution and mismatch. You can see here the split of these issues. And moreover, these two major groups are divided into three sectors. We have here health, food, and environment. And for each sector, examples of challenges and the respective tactics to address those are also present. We have here the challenges and here some tactics. And our first step then was to try to make it easier for educators to identify problems that can be explored from an evolutionary perspective. And we decided to divide these issues into the same two initial groups, but giving them different names. So instead of rapid evolution and mismatch, we called them control of unwanted organisms and protect desirable organisms. And we also had some examples of which ones. Then, to better explain how the key concepts of evolution can be present in these two major groups, we have created schematic examples for each of them with explanation in the captions of where exactly the key concepts of evolution are present. And in this part, we also had a glossary of each key evolution concept with a definition taken from the literature and a more simplified version for a more common language. Then, building on the scheme that I shown above, we present how the key concepts of evolution can be linked to the origin of the problem. You can see here that we have the original scheme, and then we had these sides. So here, how the key concepts of evolution are related with the problems in the rapid evolution or the organism that we want to control. And here the solutions, and above we also have the same, but related with mismatch groups. Okay, and I also want to say that this is built from a human being perspective, or one perspective of biodiversity conservation. So we write these from our point of view. And then additionally, we had create examples where we highlight key concepts to clarify how they can be associated with the problem or with the solution. We did this for both groups. Here, the group of organisms we want to control, and then we also have the examples for the group of organisms we want to protect. And here you can see that we use first the example of antibiotic use, and here we had an example about lifestyle-related disease. And in those texts, we highlight the key concepts, so it can be clear how evolution is here. And our next steps, in addition to improving and validating what I have shown so far, our next steps will be to head to these guidelines on how to create tasks to develop socio-scientific reasoning, taking into account that to do this, we need students to work on these 4 topics: complexity, perspectives, inquiry, and skepticism, and also guidelines on how to create tasks to develop anticipatory competency. And also taking in mind that we need to create opportunities so they can work these 5 topics. Understand and evaluate several futures, creates their own vision of the future, apply the principle of precaution, assess the consequences, and deal with risk and change. And I'm done. Thank you for your attention, and I'm here for any question.
Thank you, Patricia. And we're perfectly on time. So I'm going to give it now to Claire to help her run the first of the Q&A sessions. So you might have noticed that the way we organize this symposium is that we have 2 speakers, and then we have questions for either one of them, and the speakers themselves are also encouraged to chat with each other and to ask each other questions, but I'll let Claire run this part.
Thank you, Dula. So does anyone, if you have questions, please write them in the chat for these 2 speakers. I don't know, are people able to unmute themselves, Mike, or put up their hand as well, or is that not an option?
What we've been doing for all of our other sessions is that people can use the raise your hand, and then we can unmute that person and call on them and have them ask a question.
Yes, Haga?
I think because I'm a co-host, I might not be able to raise my hand, but so I think my question is for Dr. Rana Dujani, and your talk really resonated with me because I was born and raised in Egypt, in a Muslim country. We don't teach evolution. I came to the US to study evolution. So I think the 2 questions that are related to one another, the first one is how do we integrate teaching evolution in Middle East, especially that the government has a lot of control of what is being taught in classrooms? How do we go about that? Like, do we go to conferences or hold symposium in multiple universities and try to teach it, because it's a very important thing to learn in biology? And the second question is about language barrier, because you briefly talked about that in your talk. I'm personally being trained to be an evolutionary biologist in English. All of my vocabulary and the concepts I learn in English. And when my family asked me to describe my research, I realized that I can't in Arabic. And that was a culture shock for myself. So do you have about any tips or advice on how to go about developing our Arabic vocabulary to communicate with our local communities?
Thank you very much. Those are 2 very important questions. And maybe I'll start with the last one. Definitely, we need to find that vocabulary, and that actually relates to science communication in general, which is something globally we need to work on, and more so in our part of the world. And there have been recent efforts. There's a Science Journalism Forum in Arabic that was launched 2 years ago during COVID. There's the Arab Science Week. So these are efforts across the region trying to transfer the knowledge in Arabic. So it's also about making an effort, right? To learn to translate the words, to learn to speak them, to figure out the right translation, and to participate in creating that content if it's not available. We also have efforts through Wikipedia of enriching the scientific content of Wikipedia using university students. So these are different efforts that have been going on to help in that. And we need your efforts too, right? So it's a call out there. But what I alluded to when I said lost in translation, in the sense that the surveys that are used to assess how Muslims perceive evolution use words that have different meanings in different contexts. So for example, if you have a questionnaire and ask about, do you believe in creation? For Christians, it means something. For Muslims, it means something else. So yes, I would say I believe I'm in creation, but that doesn't mean I believe life was created in 6,000 years, et cetera, et cetera. Just it means, for me, in my mind, that means that there's the creator who started everything somewhere in the past. So therefore, that has no contradiction with evolution. But when you look at a survey, you think, oh, all right, she doesn't agree with evolution, and let's count. You know what I mean? So that's what I meant by that's why we are actually now we're submitting a proposal to conduct an in-depth by Muslim Arab-speaking scientists and theologians to unpack the complexity of the philosophy behind why or why not evolution is accepted, using specific terminology and layers of complexity, because we don't believe religiosity is what matters. It's a philosophical concept. It's not about practicing religion. It's about a philosophical concept, which leads me to your first question about science teaching of evolution in schools. Again, different governments, some governments have it in the curriculum actually, but they just cross it out, or they talk about it very lightly, or they say we're not going to teach this because we don't agree. So again, the way to do that is to create supportive accessory material, whether it's a video or a blog or a newsletter, to give teachers the support they need first for them to understand what it means and to accept it or not, and then how to portray those arguments that I discussed in my talk to the students, to the families, to the general public. Lastly, I have to say this. Again, whether we agree or not with evolution, life moves on for the general public. They're using the fruits of evolution. They're taking the vaccines or eating the vegetables. So really, is it an issue in the Islamic world or not? Is it a barrier or not? To me, it's a barrier if we use it as an example of how we do not think critically, not just about evolution, but about everything in our lives. And so I bring it up not because it's going to make an impact on an everyday life person, but it's going to make an impact about being a critical thinker and not to be hijacked by anyone with fake news, fake information, or people's agenda.
Thank you, Anna. Do we have any more questions? I can't see any hands up. If not, I have one for Patricia. Teachers, oh, sorry, is there someone with a hand up? I can't see everyone. Is there?
Hi, it was me, Dulep here.
Oh, sorry,
I can drop into a question if that's okay.
Yeah.
So there was something that struck me in both of the talks, and maybe more in Patricia's. You talked about the language we are using, and you talked about sort of we should rename it a bit like this, and then it's sort of more acceptable. Are we creating sort of an arms race in a way? We use one term, that term becomes bad, and then we sort of rename it to be acceptable to the general public, but is it going to keep going?
Yeah, excellent question. I was thinking about the same when I heard the answer of Rana. I'm not sure if bad the language that we use, but for example, in my background, in my education, I had biology until the 12th grade, but I have some colleagues that do the same job as me. They are primary teachers, but they just have biology until the 9th grade or something. So sometimes the way we write things about evolution are really difficult to understand by people that are not inside the science language, if I can say something like this. So yes, actually we are trying to solve this problem. Like, we can have these scientifically correctly, but also let's try to simplify without saying something stupid, but in still being correct, but with a language that is more easy for everyone to understand. And that's I think it's the most difficult thing that we are trying to do here.
Can I jump off what Patricia said? I just want to add, I think it's not more the terms as much as what does the term mean. And I think if we're going to have any discussion to say, okay, wait a minute, we're going to use these terms and these are the definitions. So we make sure that when I use it and you use it, that we're talking about the same thing, that I'm using it and thinking of something totally different from what you're thinking of. And I think that's one way to solve it without creating more terminology and getting even more lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Excellent. I think that's a really useful place to think about as we think about the other talks, and as we move through this, and maybe to take more into the panel discussion at the end and discuss how we communicate across different communities. I think that's probably going to come across a lot through the rest of these presentations. So our next set of presenters are also in the formal education space, and we'll be presenting particularly on education in university settings. We've got two speakers, and the first one is going to be Assistant Professor Michael Weiser from the Biological Science Department at Michigan State University. He's also one of the organizers of this entire conference, which is amazing. And thank you so much for agreeing to participate in the symposium whilst also organizing this conference. And he's going to be presenting on Avida Ed in an introductory laboratory class for life science majors. I'll pass over.
All right, so I'm going to start sharing my screen here. I will let you all know I am actually taking advantage of the fact that we are not relying on a conference center computer system. So there will be a brief moment where I actually show you working with the program. So as Claire mentioned, my name is Mike Weiser. I am an assistant professor in the introductory biology program at MSU. This is an R1 institution. I am not on the tenure track, but I am full-time teaching in faculty. So teaching in intro level, both lecture and lab. The course that I'm going to be talking to you about today that we're using this in is the introductory lab course in the population and organismal section of the introductory biology curriculum. So as we all know, evolution's a really fun thing to study, a really fun thing to talk about, but there are actually only a few things that we actually really need in order for evolution by natural selection to occur. And so one of them is that we need variation. As you can see in this image, not all of these organisms are perfect clones of each other. We have variation within populations, some of it visible, some of it not. We have variation between populations. In order for us to get evolutionary change, we can't have all of our individuals in a population be exactly the same as each other. There has to be some sort of source of variation. Our ultimate source of variation is always going to be something in the realm of mutation, but living populations have lots of other sources of variation. We can get it through migration, we can get it through recombination, we can get it through responses to environmental conditions. And that brings us up to inheritance, one of these key principles here. These dog puppies more closely resemble, on average, their parents than they do any randomly other chosen individual from the population. If all of the variation that we have in a population is induced by the environment, maybe these are all having plastic responses to the temperature in which they're being raised, or the environmental food supply, or things along those lines, if all of that variation is coming from the environment, there's nothing heritable. And so there's nothing that's going to allow certain different genetic variants to become more common within the population. Some of that heritable variation also has to have something to do with selection. Not all the individuals in the population are perfectly equal at their ability to survive or to reproduce. There has to be some degree of selection going on within the population in order for us to get evolution by natural selection. And as long as we have those three components, and further, some degree of time, things don't happen instantaneously, but in evolutionary time, we're primarily talking about time across generations. If we have all of those elements, evolution by natural selection is an inevitable outcome. But one of the key things to pay attention to here is that none of this requires DNA. We are used to thinking about biological populations where all of our genetic material is encoded in nucleic acids. And for almost all organisms, that's going to be DNA. Depending on where you fall in your debate as to whether viruses are alive or not, there are some RNA viruses, so it doesn't always have to be DNA. But this evolution here fundamentally this is a substrate neutral algorithm. Any system where we have variation, there is heritable from one generation to a next, and which imparts some degree of differentiation on the things that are being selected for, whether that's survival or reproduction, will result in evolution by natural selection as an inevitable outcome. Now, one of the things that I'm going to be talking to you about in detail here is actually this use of AVITA-Ed as an evolving system. So AVITA itself is a digital software evolution platform. The research version of it runs on command line stuff. It doesn't have this nice visual interface. But the educational version, and that's why we've got this ED here, this is set up with a graphical user interface. This actually now runs in a browser, so you don't have to download any software in order to use it. And fundamentally what's going on here is that each one of these little colored boxes here is its own self-replicating computer program. It's written in a somewhat unusual computer language. It's not like you forget to have a semicolon and therefore your entire computer crashes. Instead, these instructions do small computational chunks. So one of the instructions, for instance, adds two numbers together. Another instruction outputs something into the environment and then looks for an input from the environment for them. And this computer language, for those of you who are a little more computational, this is actually a Turing complete computer language, which means that given infinite memory, it can do anything that any other computer can do. But the key part of this for our system is that the user gets to define a mutation rate. That is the probability upon copying that instruction that the program makes a mistake and it inserts a different instruction rather than the one from the parent. And so that operates as a mutation here within this genome. And these organisms are always competing for digital resources. There's always a competition for space within this world. And in most experiments, we also set up competition for various different computational resources. I'm happy to get into the deeper Boolean logic of how they're actually doing these things, but fundamentally, it doesn't really matter for our purposes. These are the digital equivalents of metabolic reactions. If they have a pathway that's able to use a particular resource, and that resource exists in the environment, they'll get a benefit. They'll be able to operate their code faster. Therefore, they're going to be able to reproduce more in a given amount of time. Now, we have this wonderful, amazing diversity of life that lots of people here at this conference are talking about, that all at a fundamental level comes from an N of 1. We have one origin of life, and this incredible diversity we see is all a result of that original system and the environments in which it's played out. And that's great for evolving these really complicated things, and that's really useful if we want to know exactly how certain things happen. But if our questions are more about what are the chances that a given thing will happen, or how predictable is this system, it's really useful if we could have more evolutionary history than the one we have. So the entire field of experimental evolution basically lets us set up clonal copies of a world. And we can do this faster and much less expensively if we're working with a computational system than even if we're working with a microbial system. So the context of this course, this is a 100-level lab course. It's taken mostly by second-year undergrads who are life science majors. About half the sections are taught by faculty. About half of them are taught by graduate students who are teaching assistants. A section will have 28 students. You'll get the occasional drops, maybe down to 25 students. We have highly variable enrollment from one semester to the other. So one semester, generally our fall semester, we have about 14 sections, and our spring semester, we have about 22 sections of this course. So high enrollment class, and the fact that we have a lot of graduate students means that we have a decent number of our instructors who don't have a lot of experience with this particular form of instruction. So we needed to keep things relatively straightforward. The lab meets once a week for 3 hours. There's also a 1 hour asynchronous recitation section. We use our recitation section in this class primarily to teach the statistics that students are going to be using throughout the course, because there is no stats pre or co-requisite, but in order to do data analysis on an ecology and evolution lab, you're going to need statistics, and you're going to need more than just a t-test. The context of this particular lesson, the first half of the class is set up as a training phase. We teach them a bunch of different systems. So they do some stuff looking at macroscopic variation with like acorns and acacia seed pods. They look at microscopic variation under a microscope, measuring protists and algae, a lot of use of image J. They have a lab on genetics with sticklebacks. They have another genetic style lab doing inheritance patterns with Drosophila. This lab then slots in as their primary evolution lab. And then they've got a multi-week ecology lab with some microcosms. And then the second half of the semester, they are doing student-led inquiry projects. So we will set an overall theme for what a particular section will be studying. A recent semester I did, for instance, you're looking at something involving invasive species, and students have a choice of what they're going to do with it. The lesson I'm going to be showing you here is one that's essentially a reciprocal transplant experiment. We evolve one population in one environment. We evolve a population in a different environment. We take evolved organisms from each of those environments and compete them against each other in each other's environment. So we do it in both the environment something came from and the environment that its competitor came from. We're mainly hoping that students get that fitness is environment dependent, that these trade-offs exist, and they get some chance to practice using and interpreting appropriate statistics. So I've got a link here. I'm actually going to change into sharing the screen so you can see what the program actually looks like. So here is our virtual Petri dish. You'll notice I've got some things here in the freezer, and I can set up what's going on in the world. So I can, for instance, I've already evolved something. This is something evolved in an environment where the not resource was being rewarded. Here's one that was evolved in an environment where neither one was. I can drag these things in as ancestral organisms into my world. I can set whether we reward or don't reward particular tasks. I'm coding my organism color here based on which ancestor it came from. So these bright ones up here are the ones that are able to use this particular resource. The ones down here are the ones that came from an environment where that wasn't rewarded. And if I compete these things in this particular environment, you can see that this duller color is replicating faster. And that makes a certain amount of sense. It came from an environment where none of these tasks were being rewarded, and it's competing in this environment where none of the tasks are being rewarded. And you can see it's starting to take over this Petri dish and crowd out its competitor. But if I create a new competition where, again, I've got those same two competitors, and now I reward that particular task, that one of them is able to perform that particular task, that bright one up here, you'll notice it's actually replicating much faster. And so it's going to be able to outcompete its competitor. And so our fitness here really is very dependent on the environment in which we are competing and the environment in which things have evolved. And so as an example of some of the student work, this is actually a figure and a figure legend that one of my students this past year produced after this lesson. So they end up doing a bunch of replicates. We actually teach them how to do ANOVAs, and then this involves a Tukey's post hoc correction. So we actually get them looking for statistical differences across the data generated by the entire lab section, because that way we can get to higher replication levels and we can see what's actually going on here. Now, there are some real strengths of this use. We get some really high student engagement. I've gotten students saying things like, this lab is the first time I feel like I'm being a scientist. It generates data that refutes many students' predictions, and that's really helpful because we can get them to actually realize you can make a prediction And then we can test that and we can use that result to say something about the underlying theory. And some students, not many, but some do choose to use this system for their research project. There are some challenges. This is a pretty substantial overhead for a single week of lab. And students who don't do the pre-lab assignment, which is to watch a tutorial video I put together, may struggle to use the program. ANOVAs are also a little complicated for undergrads who haven't had a stats course before. The problem is most of them end up designing research projects that require an ANOVA, so we need to get that introduced to them before they get into the research part of the class. So these are my big picture takeaways with how we're using it in this particular lab setting. When we get into the question and answer period, I can tell you some about what other courses are doing, because I did spend my postdoc working on the Avita Ed project, where we ran a national study with hundreds of student classes.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Mike. That was fascinating. And we'll get to questions, as Mike said, just after we've had our next presentation. And our next presentation is from my old PhD supervisor, Peter Nonax. And I remember very clearly the buzz in the lab when he came in after a new type of exam that I'm hoping he's going to tell us a bit about today, that helped test that helped teach students about game theory and the broader work he's done on that as well. So this is Professor Peter Nonax from UCLA, and about teaching evolution as an exercise in game theory.
Thank you very much, Claire. So I'm a behavioral ecologist, and the class I actually teach is behavioral ecology, but it is completely infused with evolutionary ideas, evolutionary theory, and so on. So one day, or actually one night, and laying in bed thinking about what am I going to teach, I started thinking about, well, what are my actual goals? What do I want to accomplish in this class that I'm going to be teaching? And I kind of listed down some goals that I sort of wanted, and some of these are sort of high level goals, you know, that I think all of us kind of think about that we want to do, and have our students leave the class as maybe better human beings, and think about what we're doing and like what we're doing, and have some effect on their future. And some of the other goals are maybe sort of not so high, and maybe kind of like, you know, things we have to do as partly being instructors. And then I thought, well, you know, what do the students want out of the class? Now, some of them, again, are going to be really interested in behavioral ecology, and they may agree with all my high goals and so on. But any number of students, they're going to come into this class, you know, it's not going to be like this, where they're all eager and willing to do exactly what I want, and we're all on the same page. In fact, I think, you know, a good number of them want something quite different than what I want them to get out of the class. And that's not me being sort of disparaging of UCLA students or anything along those lines, is that they're not going to go on to be behavioral ecologists. They're going to go on to be other things, and those other things are often going to be determined by their GPA and so on. So what they really want is, you know, to enjoy the class maybe, but also to get a good grade. So when I thought about that, it's like, well, this is classic game theory, right? Where there's two players here. One is me, the instructor, and we can say the other player is just the student body itself. And we have mostly different and very unshared goals, which makes it kind of hard to decide, how am I going to win? If we all agreed upon what we wanted to get out of the class in every sort of way, it would be easy. But we don't, not all the students. So how does the instructor actually win? And of course, there is this one thing here where we want to give out appropriate grades for the work done, and students want to get a good grade. And we have this dilemma of that, you know, that encourages at times cheating or plagiarism or all kinds of things we don't want the students to do to get around getting a good grade. So how do we deal with these kind of differences in goals and outcomes, and how do we win this game? Well, when I started thinking about that, I said, well, maybe I can use these lowest goals that we have, you know, and put it into a conflict situation and, in a sense, make it evident to the students that we are in a conflict situation. And by manipulating the kind of exams, the way I evaluate students, maybe I can get to where I want to go and not necessarily just give up on all what the students want out of the class as well. So I decided to completely revamp how I examine, how I write tests. And I'm going to go through the 4 tests that I do in my sort of behavioral ecology class somewhat quickly. By the way, I would sort of say I'm willing to share all my PowerPoints if anybody wants to get this, because some of them are going to be a bit wordy. Now, common to all of these things is that the questions, and I warn the students literally in the first day of class, are going to be challenging. Oftentimes, there's no single right answer. It's the logic you use to defend whatever answer you're going to put is what is going to be evaluated. It may require the students in some cases to go beyond the lectures. It's not a memorization class. You're not going to get a good grade simply by memorizing the course presentations. You may have to actually do some research on your own. You may need to synthesize what you learn across topics and so on to actually answer it very well. So first day in class, I give them the exam, which is in a sense a take-home exam. Here's the question. We're in a quarter system, so about 2 weeks from that first day, there's going to be a test. And the questions, and you can obviously have them, are going to relate to the course material, but I will not be directly sort of addressing the question. The question will be sort of part of that topic, but not something I'm going to talk about. Now, here's where things get a bit interesting, which is students can work completely together. They have the test, they can decide how they research, they can decide how they want to write the answers and so on. And on the test day, 2 weeks from on, students are going to be expected to come in and from memory, write out their answer. No notes, no other helps and so on. So this kind of forces them to actually learn what their answer is going to be. But also, if the students actually have worked as a group, and I'm encouraging very strongly for them to work as groups, they can designate one person to come in and write out the test. I mean, we don't want to grade 4, 5, 6 tests where the answer is more or less the same thing. So this person will write out one answer for all of them. And this, by the way, makes you beloved among your TAs because you start out with a class of 40 or 50 students, and they don't have to grade 40 or 50 tests. They may only have to grade like 5 to 10 tests. So the TAs will love this. You'll be a hero for them as well. So that comes in, and the students come in and they write out their answer. And again, the emphasis I put on this at the beginning of class is I want the best possible answers to the questions I ask. And I do not really care how you get there. I do not really care if it's memorization. I don't care if you talk to other people. I don't care what you do. I want the best answers to my questions. And sometimes I don't even know what the answer is going to be. I have an idea, but I'm willing to accept something else if you can convince me it's a good answer. So that's what I want. Now, the second test is one where it's actually gone a bit viral on occasions, what's been called the cheating test. So the students have done this first exam. Now, the second one I say is, okay, if you thought the first question is tough, wait till you see the next one. It's going to be the most complex, difficult question I can think of. It's going to have multiple parts, and you're not going to get to see it until the day of the test. But during the exam, and this is what's called a cheating test, is during the exam, you can do anything you want. Again, all I want is the best possible answer. You can talk to other people, you can go online, you can use your notes, and now I guess you can even feed the question into ChatGPT and see what it says. I don't care. Whatever you come up with, I just want the best answer. And if everybody prepares it as a group, and in case I've done this multiple times now, and in some cases, the entire class works together and you have one answer at the end of it. And everybody can sign on to it and so on. And again, TAs love it, few tests to grade, and the answers generally are good. In other words, they're far better than the kind of things I would get on essay questions in the old-fashioned way of designing it. Now, there's one thing here, again, is you sort of worry about that there's free writing, and students can realize, oh, I don't have to do anything. I'll just come and I'll sign my name onto somebody else's answer that I think is pretty good and so on. But the groups are allowed to exclude anybody who doesn't, contribute. And I'm there as sort of the sergeant of arms, and I will support this kind of thing, is nobody can just sort of parasitize another group if that other group doesn't want them in it. So that makes free riding sort of a dangerous strategy. Now, again, as you can sort of see, I usually do this after I've taught a session on game theory. So students are starting to kind of realize that this is a game. And they're going to be playing it, and they have to figure out their rules, and they have to figure out who's in, who's out, who's going to do what, so on. So it's very much living game theory as it's being taught to you. The third one is more sort of a standard test, which is I sort of flip things and say, okay, I want you guys to think like an instructor. You've seen the kind of questions I want. Write questions that you think I would write. And that's going to be part of your grade, some significant fraction, maybe 25 to 50% of your grade. And you have to turn them in before the test starts. So in other words, you're starting to think like I do in terms of asking an interesting question that's going to challenge your classmates to think and critically analyze and so on. And if they're especially good questions, I'll actually maybe edit them for clarity, but they will be on the test. So in essence, you're going to be lucky that maybe one of your questions is on the test and you damn well should know the answer to your question. So that's going to be good. So again, I found that like 50% of the test can be student written. They write oftentimes very, very good questions. And on the test day, students will take the test as they would any other. And again, you can decide whether they can use cheat sheets, other notes, or other kind of helps, whatever you want at your sort of discretion. Now, at the end, the final one is what's called the debate test. And so again, now I come up with several, and I present material where, again, it's fairly fresh, it's new material, and there are pros and cons. People argue about it. So you can set up various questions that have strong or at least reasonable pro and con positions to some statement on some controversial issue in the particular field that you just have been lecturing on. So students can choose again which side they want to be on. And at this point, this is something, again, for UCLA, which is a huge campus. Students oftentimes don't know each other, even though they've seen, each other's faces, maybe in multiple classes and so on. But at this point, you've had like 8 weeks of them being forced to collaborate, forced to interact, and they actually have gotten to know each other. And so groups can form of people who didn't know each other now, but are friends and get along. Or you can just basically assign some people who don't have a particular preference randomly across groups. Now, again, the collaborative aspect of this is you have your test in front of you and you write a paper, 2 to 3 pages max, supporting your position, whether there's pro or con. And again, you can work with anybody. You can ask anybody. You can ask TAs. You can bounce ideas off me. All we care about is that you come up with the best possible logic to support your position. And this paper is due before the class, and it's like 50% of the grade. Now, again, in a classic debate, you would have the pro and con side going at each other. But again, I'm setting it up so it's the students against me. So whatever side they're on, I'm on the opposite side. And I give them a challenge question during the test. And they have the test period to rebut my challenge to their position. If it's a pro position or if it's a con position, they have to argue against me. And so again, the students now can use notes, they can develop their response, they can actually talk to the other side of this particular thing and say, well, what do you, we're on the pro side, what were you just thinking about when you were on the con side? Again, the only thing that really matters here is the best possible product that the students can produce. And again, I don't care how they do it. Now, this obviously gets rid of a lot of the problems that we sort of face when we think about, well, what's cheating? Well, most of what's going on here in normal classes would be considered cheating, but it's not here. It is totally collaborative, totally idea, totally to get to give Peter Nonax a good answer. And so what have I found over time? Well, basically, I find that most of these things that I wanted to have happen. Now, the big bugaboo with teaching and evaluating teaching is what we really want to know is like, well, 15, 20 years from now, did our class make a difference to you? I don't know. That's something, you know, we none of us really oftentimes know whether anything we're doing really improved things in a long sort of way. But I do get sort of things, well, students say, you know, I really enjoyed this class. This was fantastic. I do get a lot of, obviously, social collaboration. People make friends with each other that they would not have made in other ways. People tend to care about the subject much more because it was much more interesting. And certainly, again, like I say, overwhelmingly, the answers I get to the questions, and they're hard questions, are pretty darn good. And so obviously there's critical thinking skills being sort of kind of developed here. So, and my evals are kind of nice, you know, and I do get comments from students years after they've taken the class that they remember this class. They remember the tests. And I would ask people here, I mean, probably most of us have taken thousands of tests. How many of those tests do you actually remember the details of what you did on that test? Students remember my class. That's nice. I enjoy that. One last thing, quickly, what I do, and this is for those of you who are a bit brave and want to do this, which is I allow the students to turn the tables on me, and I do something like every other week called Stump the Professor. And they get to ask me a question on the general course topic. It's not some obscure trivial question, but something about, say, behavioral ecology that, say, a professor who purports to be a behavioral ecologist ought to be able to answer. I don't get to see the question in advance. It usually goes through my TA. I go there, the question is given to me, I get a cold read on it, and I have to be able to provide a plausible answer to the question. Can I do it? If I fail, if you've stumped me, you get extra credit. And so this, again, kind of forces the students to go and research a topic in a way that's outside of the course material, obviously, to find something that maybe I should know that I don't. And they greatly enjoy me sitting there sweating, trying to sort of make sure that I can actually come up with a plausible answer. Most of the time, I'm pretty good at this. But I will say that, you know, I have been stumped on occasion. And so, again, the students greatly enjoy this, you know, forcing the professor to, you know, sweat a bit. And so anyway, that's it. Questions, stump the professor. I'm not giving out any extra credit though. And again, remind you that if you want, again, I went through a lot of these things very quickly. If you're interested in this presentation, I'm happy to share my PowerPoints and email you. Just request it and it's fine. And thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Peter. Well, appropriately for Peter's tests, you've actually got half an hour now to go away and find the hardest questions that you can for Mike and for Peter, and come back to our second session where we'll start with a Q&A for Mike and Peter. So go away, come back and see if you can stump the professors.